Is there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by 3 self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL Pioneers.
Okay, today's TEFL pioneer is Ruth Wajnryb.
Okay.
And I stuttered there. I hope I'm saying that right. How would you say her surname or her first name, which I struggle with?
Her first name, I'd use a TH and an R.
Yeah. For some reason, I feel like I've heard the last name as Wajnryb, but
Wajnryb.
I've no idea if that's correct or not.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, but I think I might have heard that from you, so I'm not sure.
Okay, well, Ruth Wajnryb, we'll go with, is my TEFL pioneer today. Are you familiar with her work?
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
So the reason I want to talk about it today is because one of her books kind of influenced me quite a lot in my teaching or teacher training, more like, and teacher development, is Classroom Observation Tasks, which, Matt, I know you're familiar with.
Yes.
So should Rob. You're familiar with this too?
I've seen it.
I'll come back to this later, but this is quite an important book for me, I think, so we'll talk about that later. But first, let's talk about Dr. Wajnryb's professional career. So she was born in Sydney in 1948. She passed away in 2012. So this is quite a fairly recent pioneer today. And just talking about her professional career, she received her PhD from Macquarie University.
Okay. Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
Probably not.
All these words.
Macquarie,
I
Macquarie.
thought, yeah.
And she was the former head of the University of North South Wales' Institute of Languages.
Okay.
She was the head of the TEFL teacher education program there. And she also worked for, I think, Anaheim University's MA TEFL program. And she has some link to Japan, and I think that might be it.
Right.
But I'm not sure.
Does Anaheim University do any other courses apart from the MA TEFL? The only time I hear them mentioned is in that context.
I mean, they're known for that. They have an online program. And there's a lot of people affiliated with them. I think Rod Ellis, David Noonan are also affiliated. And she was also affiliated in her life. And she taught classroom management and observation as well as phonology classes. A bit about her upbringing and her background. She was the daughter of Polish immigrants to Australia who had survived the Holocaust. And they were doctors, her immigrants. They were a group of doctors.
Of applied linguistics?
I don't know what they were doctors of. I presume probably not. But they were all doctors. She came from a family of doctors. And aside from her TESOL kind of life, I'm going to talk about more today, she's also known for having a special interest in the narratives of Holocaust survivors.
Oh, okay.
So she's got this whole other kind of vein of writing.
Was that also academic writing or more kind of...
It's kind of... So the book I'm talking about in particular is it's called The Silence, How Tragedy Shapes Talk.
Right.
And it's kind of semi-biographical, but it's also based on narratives, like interviews with Holocaust survivors.
Right.
Locally in Australia, she's known for having a weekly, or she was known, for having a weekly column in the Sydney Morning Herald, all about language, basically. I haven't actually read the book, but it's been described as, it presents a narrative, basically. But it talks about unspeakability and unhearability of language. And this sounds extremely vague, because it is, because I haven't read it. But it's been described as a very kind of breakthrough, kind of seminal work for this kind of field.
It was interesting. I was reading a book about autoethnography, which is something I've been looking into, and one of the people in that describes doing a lot of autoethnographic work with Holocaust survivors, kind of interviewing them and reconstructing their lives and that kind of thing. I guess it's a similar kind of thing. Yeah,
so she talked about the book in an interview, and she said she wanted to reclaim the language of the Holocaust survivors, the way that they constructed their stories through the use of language in particular. And I think she said that was an area that was kind of less researched than other areas.
Right.
She said, yeah, so it was more language focused. She was also a newspaper columnist, and she was, just interested in language in general.
Right.
A couple of names of her books: Australian Place Name Stories.
Okay.
That gives you an idea
An
of
etymology book, I guess.
the thing she's into. And Cheerio, Tom, Dick and Harry, Dispatches from the Hospice of Fading Words.
Oh.
Okay.
Interesting title.
Sounds interesting.
About words dying out, I
guess
guess.
so.
Yeah.
Moving into TEFL, so she's perhaps best known for, and you've talked about this on one of our previous podcasts a long time ago. Do you know what she's most known for in our kind of profession?
I'm drawing a blank. I do remember this, but I'm drawing a blank. In fact,
The observation stuff?
It was one of, not the observation, well, I think she is for
Okay.
that personally, but it was one of your sections.
Okay.
Dictogloss.
Oh, right.
She's known for Dictogloss.
Did she invent the Dictogloss?
I'm not sure she invented Dictogloss in the same way as she didn't invent classroom observation tasks.
Right.
But it was the 1990 grammar dictation book where she first kind of put down her ideas of Dictogloss. Can you just remind us?
That's maybe the older term, I think, for a Dictogloss is a grammar dictation.
Right, yeah. So it was in the book Grammar Dictation where she kind of laid out the 4 steps of Dictogloss,
which are the 4 steps. I mean, basically the Dictogloss is reading a passage to a group of students. So I guess maybe first assigning...
Warm up,
And maybe first the students would decide amongst themselves what they're listening for.
Okay.
Maybe each of them is listening for something different. They hear the passage.
The dictation.
That's the dictation part.
Yep.
And then they work as a group together to reconstruct the reading.
The reconstruction part. Yep. And then the final part is the analysis and correction. And that was the 4 stages that she talked about in that 1990 book. And I think that book was revised in 2005. So it's still quite a well-respected book. In the book, she argued that this method gives students a more precise understanding of English grammar more than other approaches do.
Okay.
And it produces higher accuracy in language use. Was that something you'd agree with?
I guess so. I don't know. I used it for my final Delta portfolio assignment, as they were called back then.
Ah, right, okay.
It was successful for that. I've used Dictoglosses in various contexts before, but I've never done any research in terms of the effectiveness.
I think, is it Meryl Swain is quite a big supporter of Dictogloss and has continued to write about it beyond Ruth's work. Moving on to why I think she's a pioneer is this book, the Classroom Observation Tasks. I asked you before, have you used any of the tasks in this book?
Yes, I have.
Can you?
Not knowingly, but I assume that the things that I've picked up from other people can probably be sourced to that. So I probably have, not knowing it.
There's a couple. There's another guy called Luke Prodromou.
Prodromou?
Prodromou. I'm not sure. Again, sorry if you're listening. He's not. But he's also one of the other people responsible for observation tasks, like developing models for observation. And this book kind of deals with loads of different types of observation. It looks at classroom management, the learners, what the learners are doing or what they're saying, what the teachers are doing, for example, where they're standing in the class, anything can be observed, basically. And this book deals with some of the models to observe that.
Right.
I'll just dip in and just give you an example of one. So one example is the language of feedback to error, teachers' meta-language, learning aims, and also lesson breakdowns.
Okay.
And classroom power is quite an interesting tool.
Right.
And what this book does is it just has, as well as observation models, it kind of gives kind of frameworks as to how you can observe either your self-teaching, I guess, or other teachers, and how you can kind of capture this information on a table, as it were, or something. Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting about it is that the book is, I guess it assumes the kind of traditional model of observation where somebody sits in the classroom and watches.
Yeah.
But often as the purpose of all these tasks is it's formative rather than evaluative, basically.
Sure, yeah.
And so the observer and the observee, I think what she suggests, meet beforehand and decide what's going to be observed.
Yeah.
And it's the observer is kind of just acting as somebody to collect data for the observee to use for their own self-reflection.
Although having said that, I use this, I think I used it with you, Rob, actually, but you're not aware of this. When I was doing my DIP TESOL, I came to observe your class.
I remember.
Do you remember that? And I used a model that I developed from here.
Yeah.
That I developed myself. And
I remember you being unfairly critical.
And I watched you teach, and I can't remember what it was now, but it was something that I took from here initially and kind of changed it a lot. But,
it was about the feedback I was giving, I think. I remember at one point. Actually, it might have been about ICQs or something. Because I remember when you gave me your feedback, you said at one point I gave students a load of instructions and then said, "Do you understand? Cool, let's go."
No, I mean I wasn't observing for that. I was observing for the thing about this book is it helps you to kind of train your skills of observation. So she argues that observation's not intuitive. It's a skill that has to be learnt essentially, and what I think that was a point that I wanted to pick out, but I didn't. And one of the problems with my earlier observation models, I was trying to capture everything, and I wasn't being focused on what I was purely looking for. Right. Which was, I can't remember. It wasn't that.
But this is something we had to do on the DIP TESL, the Trinity course. Did you have to do this on the Delta, like develop an observation model?
I don't think so, no.
Because it was part of the kind of the management focus of it. Right. So I remember I did one about amount of vocabulary or something. Yeah. And observed a teacher who introduced something like 180 words in one lesson, which was ridiculous.
Yeah, I also observed his class, and again, I wasn't looking for that, but that made its way onto my model. I think I was looking how dogme-ready your teaching was, and how much you were dealing with emerging problems. Right. Which isn't in this book, but it was something that I took out from it. So anyway, that's why I think she's a TEFL pioneer. So, but she's kind of covered, Dictogloss is something that we all know about, and observation tasks are also very important as well.
So I'm not currently engaged in teacher training, but I will be in a couple of years. I'll be teaching high school teachers. I found out yesterday, and so I think it probably actually will be really useful to have a book like this that I can use to kind of construct observation models. I think it's useful to have that kind of thing in place, and I think it's probably had an impact on training courses.
Personally, I don't think there's many, apart from I guess the bigger fields where you'd find more about this stuff is kind of in reflective practice. And obviously this is a form of reflective practice, but I don't think there's many books that deal specifically with observation models or tasks.
Maybe not. Yeah, I mean, one thing about that book is it's quite. The tasks are quite open to interpretation. She provides a kind of general. I mean, they're quite specific in terms of what you're looking at, but they could be carried out by people in different ways. And I think nowadays there are more kind of carefully constructed models of observation, like very specific things to look out for, and you can tick boxes and that kind of stuff. But in terms of, I think what's pioneering about that book maybe is this idea of just focusing on one thing at a time.
Sure, and I think that's part of the skill. Okay, so that concludes today's TEFL pioneer. Ruth Wajnryb.
TEFL cultures. Today's TEFL culture is basic English. Have you heard of basic English? No?
Is this some kind of, like the crazy English kind of? That kind of?
Not quite.
No. Okay.
It's well, I'll explain what it is. So it was created by a linguistic philosopher, quite a famous linguistic philosopher called Charles K. Ogden. Can you guess what the K stands for?
Crazy.
Not crazy.
Night.
No, it stands for K, K-A-Y. It's like Homer J. Simpson. It's Charles K. Ogden. So he visited, I don't have his birth and death dates, unfortunately, but he visited Europe at the age of 23, 24 in the early 1900s to investigate language teaching methods. In 1925, he started working on Basic English, okay? And he published a book titled Basic English in 1930. Basically, Basic English is it's an international auxiliary language like Esperanto or Interlingua, which we talked about before.
Yes.
Yeah. And Basic, you might think that just means basic, like simple. It's actually an acronym. It stands for British, American, Scientific, International, Commercial.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's nothing but basic. Well, it's nothing.
It's anything but basic.
Anything but basic. Okay. Basic English. Okay.
But it is actually a cut down form of English. I'll describe it in a little while. But it's got a very limited vocabulary, very limited grammar rules, and the idea was to create a model of English that could be taught very easily to people around the world. So Ogden said, it takes 7 years to learn English, 7 months to learn Esperanto, and only 7 weeks to learn Basic English, apparently. Apparently. He also said, I think this is quite an interesting quote, he said, "What the world needs most is about 1,000 more dead languages and 1 more alive." So I think he meant we should stop.
That's a threat.
Yes.
Right.
Sounds like a great premise to a film.
Yeah.
a very slow film. Linguicide, the movie. So as I say, it's a very stripped down form of English. In terms of vocabulary, Ogden came up with a list of 850 keywords. He said this is all you need for basic daily life, 850 words. And he included only 18 verbs. And he didn't call them verbs, he called them operators.
Nice.
And then he wrote in one of his books, Basic English has no verbs. But that's only because he changed the name of what they are.
What year did this first begin?
1930 he published the first book.
So would this be around the same time of the general service?
Yes.
Was it based on that?
It wasn't. In fact, Ogden and Michael West, who came up with were huge enemies and rivals.
Really?
They hated each other.
Okay,
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've probably stated that, but still.
Libelous.
So he said 850 keywords.
Okay.
But he said that students should learn an extra 150 words for specific fields. So if you're going to be a scientist, you need to learn 150 science words. If you're going to be a businessman, you need to learn 150 business words. And he also said that there are about 200 international words, so words that are in common use around the globe that learners should already know. And then there's a few other additions. So he says 850 words, but if you tally it all up, it's like 2,650,
right.
Which is what intermediate level speakers are expected to know anyway. So that's the vocabulary rules. In terms of grammar, Ogden said that, the rules he came up with were you can make plurals pretty much the same as in English, add s to the end of a word, or add es or ies for certain words.
Okay. It's interesting that he decided we need plurals.
Yes, well, yeah. This is actually one of the criticisms that I'll come to a bit later on. For changing adjectives, you can use er or est. And that's it. For ending... For verb endings, or sorry, they're not verbs, operator endings, ing or ed, nothing else. Yeah. And so on. So there's a very short list of grammar points that you have to follow for basic English. And he said, this is kind of a tell, measures, numbers, money, days, months, years, etc. all use English forms, British English. He was British.
Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
American.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sure.
So, just on the surface, how does that sound as an idea, as an international auxiliary language with very limited vocabulary and kind of very simplified grammar rules?
I think these ideas are good at heart, and they have a good motivation, but I don't know if they ever work, though. And they haven't really worked, have they?
His idea was that this would be English as a lingua franca, like...
Basically, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
basically.
type of, yeah.
Okay. I mean, in terms of communicating certain things, the thing about the operators, so limiting it to how many, was it?
18.
18.
Yes.
18.
18.
So that means... So I guess there's two ways you could go with that. Either lots of phrasal verbs, or verb phrases.
Yes.
Is that what he was doing?
Yes.
Okay.
Again, that's in my criticism section.
Right. Okay. Yeah, but that sounds to me less basic.
Yes, yeah. And again, that's one of the criticisms.
Right.
Yeah.
This comes in like the 1930s. Obviously now this kind of approach is very out of date because, we're talking about intercultural and this whole idea. Like, people are more flexible with their languages, like world Englishes, and like language is more inclusive these days. Right.
But I guess one crossover is, I guess some ELF people would say, like, I assume there's, I don't know, if I were to try to make a basic version, you would drop, for example, third person singular S.
Right.
I wonder if you did that.
Well, in fact, it's interesting you mention ELF. So Barbara Zeidelhofer actually has written about simple basic English and talked about some of the merits and explained how we should be testing it and seeing if it works, that kind of thing.
Yeah. If you are going to, I imagine there's some crossover with ELF.
Yes.
Maybe especially in terms of pronunciation or articles or things.
Pronunciation actually, I didn't find that much information about pronunciation. So I'm not sure how big a part of it it was. It seems to be more focused on vocabulary and grammar. But so in the 1930s, when just after Ogden published the first book, it was actually very influential. There were lots and lots of books that started being translated into Basic English. People were doing translations of famous books into Basic English. If you look online, you can find things like the Declaration of Independence in Basic English. At one point, the Basic English New Testament was selling 1,000 copies a day.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite a lot.
Quite a lot of time.
Yeah. One person who was a big promoter of Basic English was Winston Churchill. So he set up a special cabinet committee on Basic English in 1940. And he gave speeches all around the world defending it, including when he was receiving an honorary doctorate from Harvard. He made a speech about how great Basic English is.
Did he give the speech in Basic English?
I doubt it.
Did he say it's
Churchill?
It's gooder than other forms of English?
Why was he into it so much?
Well, I'll explain in a little while. So Ogden started producing books written in Basic English, teaching Basic English, which were called the Step-by-Step series. So this is the reason Churchill was so into it, because Churchill, obviously famous for his work on the Second World War. You had the Allies, who were all countries, people from different linguistic backgrounds working together. And he felt that Basic English was a way that the soldiers could learn to communicate with each other using Basic English. So the step-by-step series of Basic English textbooks was kind of promoted and used as a way of teaching all these soldiers and immigrants and refugees and all that kind of thing how to speak English at the time.
Right.
So in the books, lessons were organised into steps. Each step had a topic-based reading and then questions about the text, and then there were some kind of dialogues. We're going to look at one of those dialogues in a moment. So that's kind of the influence of Basic English.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, there's some criticism. So one problem is that it requires a lot of circumlocutions. You can't use the words that you want to use very often because they're not part of the word list. So as you said, a lot of compounding goes on. Right. Instead of dine, you say had dinner, which is fine actually, but there's lots of other examples where it doesn't really work. It sounds very unnatural. And also, as you could probably imagine, with this grammar set, it involves a lot of paraphrasing. So you end up, in a way, using more complex language to describe things. And the final criticism was that it's biased towards English and American. So,
sure.
There you go. So let's look at a sample of Basic English. This is a script, a dialogue written by Ogden himself, published in his book. This is a conversation between Mr. Anyman and his girlfriend.
Who do you want to be? No.
Mr. Anyman.
Right, I'm your girlfriend then. Or any man's girlfriend.
Yeah.
It's a bold claim to make on the podcast, Matt.
Yeah. If you're interested. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so start reading through whenever you like.
Okay.
This is in the movie theatre, but he called it in the moving picture house.
Okay.
So that's the basic English vocabulary.
So we're in the big downstairs room of the moving picture house.
Exactly.
Okay. Here I am. Which are we to go to? The Loves of the Dogfish or something with Maurice Chevalier?
Is there one with Chevalier?
Certain to be.
But you're not certain.
Well, I'll have a look in the paper.
No need, because there certainly isn't one.
Well, I'll get a paper and see what selection there is. Paper, please.
Silver Moon and Red Flame, 10-1.
Well, of all the...
Has he gone off your penny?
Yes. Probably that's all anyone gets it for. He gives them the important news and they let him keep the penny.
Then let's go anywhere. This will do.
Not for me. I'm all against Buster Keaton.
Poor Buster. What's he done?
Nothing. That's why.
You haven't ever seen him.
There are numbers like him, I'm certain. It would be much better to see the pictures outside before making a decision.
Well, what about these then?
This is all legs and acting.
Then what about the one on the other side of the road?
If possible. Let's have something with sea and waves in it. That's my bright thought for a night like this.
Well, if there's no sea across the road, I'll go to Buster Keaton by myself.
All right. I say, it is sea.
Good. Well, we'll go here then.
2 circles, please.
Front, sir?
Yes, please.
No, there's bad air coming up over those front seats.
So there is. We've had that experience before.
Okay.
What the hell?
What do you think the bad air was? Like a breeze, like a draft?
I think it was a fart.
Bad air covers drafts and right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, what do you think of this extremely natural and flowing dialogue?
Well, I mean, this is meant to be performed anyway, so it's not going to be, and especially from the 30s, right. Even if it were in complicated English, the variety that we speak. Yeah. It probably would be supernatural.
I actually, to be honest, I chose the most unnatural and funny one of all the options.
Yeah, the interesting, like the first line I thought was interesting. Which are we to go to?
Yeah.
So I wonder if that was like which one should we should has been taken out? Or, I don't know.
And it doesn't say like you'd say which film we're going to see or which movie, but obviously moving picture house. So movie isn't in those 850 words, at least at that time. In
or
the
moving
30s.
Pictures maybe.
Yeah.
Certain to be, but you're not certain.
Yeah, that's all.
Surely that should be. There is. I'm certain that there will be. So they've just taken all that out and. Okay.
And Ogden obviously had a thing against Buster Keaton.
Yeah, I know. I was really annoyed about that. I love Buster Keaton.
It's all legs and acting.
It is all legs and acting. That's,
oh wait, it isn't, is it? Oh no, it is. Yes, it is all legs and acting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you can see from this the constructions are. I mean, it makes sense. You can understand it. And to be honest, as I said, in the ones that you can see online, there are more natural dialogues.
Yeah.
But I think this kind of highlights some of the issues with it, with basic English, in that there's a little bit too much indirectness, too much talking around things. Things aren't completely clear.
It's a bit vague.
Yes. Yeah. So. Finally, just a couple of literary references that I found on Wikipedia. Do very thorough research. In The Shape of Things to Come by H.G. Wells, Wells depicted basic English as the lingua franca of the new elite. And it succeeds in uniting the entire world in a single tongue. Yeah, there you go. Between 1942 and 1944, George Orwell was a proponent of basic English, but he later turned against it.
Right.
And it inspired Newspeak in 1984, which you can perhaps see from the dialogue a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah. Today, people don't use basic English very much. It is still used. You can find a website where all of the books are actually up there for free. You can go and look at them.
I wonder if, because this is very of the 1930s, I wonder if there's a modern version of basic English.
Yeah, well, I think
that's got to be right.
I think people are still trying to update it, but I'm not entirely sure. But one thing that I did find out is that Wikipedia has a simple English version that's written using the basic English vocabulary list.
Okay, right.
So it does have
vocabulary-wise, but some of these mannerism, all right, I say, that sounds not of now.
Maybe,
yeah.
But the words might be.
Yeah. So I think we could say it's an interesting idea. It was very successful for a short time, but linguists hated it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were very against it. I think it probably had some useful utility in helping soldiers communicate, that kind of thing, during the war. And perhaps it helped introduce people to the language when they came to, when immigrants and refugees came to new countries. But yeah, it's fallen out of favour a little bit. So that's today's TEFL Culture, Basic English.
TEFL News.
Okay, welcome to TEFL News. This is a follow-up on our very first ever TEFL News. Do you remember what that was about?
It was about bilingualism, I believe, and
that's
brain.
right.
But we followed this up already.
Yeah.
Did we?
Yeah, we did.
The third instalment.
Okay, this is the third installment. What was the first follow-up about?
It was the same thing.
Okay. And recalling those news items, what were the findings in terms of the effect of bilingualism on the brain?
Kids with more than one language was it saying that they have like bigger brain?
It makes your brain grow.
Density,
I remember.
or
Your brain grows in density when you learn a foreign language, because they did it with like soldiers or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think maybe the first item was about like native bilinguals, like kids who they have two L1s.
Right.
And then maybe the next one was the effect of just. I think they found even if you learn a second language, it has similar effects on the brain.
Yeah. I think the overall point was that bilinguals are just sort of morally better than other people.
Not morally.
And now you're going to tell us they're not. It's the complete opposite.
No, but I'm gonna. Well, you'll find out. So this is.
They can also fly.
They're unicorns. This is basically a bit of research that was published in the journal Cognition.
Okay.
It's a study undertaken by researchers from the University of Cambridge, University of Cyprus, and the Cyprus University of Technology.
Okay.
By Dr. Kyriakos Antoniou.
Okay.
And Napoleon Katsos.
Are you confident with those pronunciations?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So they did a bit of research on not bilingualism, bidialectism.
So people with two dialects.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, so first of all, how would you define a dialect?
A variety of a language specific to a particular place and community.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So there's kind of two definitions of dialect. Basically if you have the kind of standard version of a language and then varieties that kind of grow off from that. Or you have kind of things that are actually considered different languages, but maybe sprout up simultaneously within a region. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Right.
But basically here the idea is, yes, people who can communicate in two or more dialects.
Would for example, like we've all got kind of a teacher voice, and I think you could probably find commonalities within the teacher voice in terms of like the grading of vocabulary and that kind of, would that be considered a kind of dialect?
I think it probably would.
All right.
Yeah.
So in that case, we're all bidialectical.
Right. A sociolect or...
Yeah, that's more of a professional kind of, like an in-house kind of dialect that you adopt. It's
right.
like, when you talk on the telephone, you put on a telephone voice.
Right. Is that a dialect?
I wonder.
I think
telephone voice might be
stretching. It has to be a bit more far-reaching. It has to be a bit more socially far-reaching than being on the telephone.
Right.
Maybe.
I'm just thinking in terms of this, whatever the result of this research is, what counts as just switching between different registers? Does that count as?
Yeah, I think maybe telephone voice, that kind of thing, might be a register rather than a dialect.
Have you met any? One of my university friends had. She was from Reading in the south of England, but when she was with her mum, who was from Scotland, her voice was completely different. They had just switched. And that might be what they mean.
So that is
quite unique.
That is something that they are referring to is people who have like their home dialect and then a different dialect, or maybe it's quite common once people go to university in a different part of their country, and maybe get better at adopting a kind of standard version of their language.
That's what I was saying. It's quite rare people have two distinct local dialects. It's more they have their local dialect and then the more standard form, which is kind of what I was getting at with the teacher voice thing.
I think that's part of it. I remember, I wish I could remember her name. I should have checked beforehand. But there's a woman at a university in the south of England somewhere. And I think she still has it. I haven't checked it in a while. But she had a blog called Separated by a Common Language.
Okay.
And she's an American who moved to England to teach at university there. And she would just have blog posts about differences between American and British English. And I would occasionally, send in things or email her, and we corresponded a bit about... I was kind of interested in this idea of bidialectalism. Because reading her blog, I became aware that sometimes the American version felt more familiar to me, and sometimes the British version felt more familiar to me.
Right.
Yeah, and this was maybe 10 years ago, but she said at the time there was very little research on bidialectalism.
Right.
Or especially SDA, like second dialect acquisition.
Okay.
Acquiring a second dialect. Okay. Anyway, the bit of research they did, it was done in... so they studied the cognitive performance of children who grew up speaking both Cypriot Greek and Standard Modern Greek. So I presume this is done in Cyprus. Basically, two varieties of Greek which are closely related, but they differ on all levels of language, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar, basically. But the kind of headline results of this survey is that the cognitive advantages that bilingual people have over non-bilingual people, which, as we've talked about twice before, there's a lot of research on that. Bidialectal people have those same advantages.
All right. So they're also psychic and
they're also
shoot lasers out of their eyes.
Yes, yeah. They're also better than everybody else. Yeah. So there's the research. So there's a lot of research for multilingual children, all the positive cognitive net effect for them. But it seems to work for bidialectals as well.
To the same degree. So in other words, you don't have to learn a foreign language. You can just sort of put on a Scouse accent.
I guess so. Yeah.
Okay.
Harry Enfield is.
Well, yeah. Impressionists must be they must have super strength.
Right.
You're talking about like native bidialectism, right? Not like an acquired bidialectism.
Yeah, it's not really clear, to be honest, from this research, but that's what it sounds like. I mean, it sounds like this case of, it seems like these kids, they grow up, it says they grow up, they speak both Cypriot Greek, presumably at home, and then at school or in other places they speak Standard Modern Greek.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this happens all over the world. One example the article gives that I read from is millions of children in the U.S. speaking what's called African American English at home, and then what's called mainstream American English at school. So they basically in different contexts they switch the way they speak.
It's the same in like Singapore and Nigeria. You've got the like Singaporean Standard English, and then the Singaporean Colloquial English, Nigerian Standard, Nigerian Colloquial, and some people only speak one, and some people can switch between the two.
Right.
What about even in the UK, like in Cornwall? Cornish, that's not a language, is it? It
is. Cornish it's a minority. I actually taught a class on this recently. It got minority language status in I think 2008 maybe.
Okay. But so it is a language.
Yeah. I mean, they talked about in the UK specifically in Lowland Scotland, speakers of Scots and Standard Scottish English, and they say there is this grey area, and that may be a case of bilingualism instead.
Okay.
Yeah. So the results. So basically, for this study, they had three groups. They had a group of bidialectal children, multilingual children, and monolingual children. And these are the three groups that they looked at, and they did kind of performance tests. They factored in socioeconomic status, language proficiency, and general intelligence to kind of take that out as a variable. And they found that the bidialectal and the multilingual both had similar positive effects over the monolingual children.
How you may have said this. How did they measure these effects?
I'm not sure exactly.
could have been with, I think that last one, wasn't it, like brain scans?
Well, the second one we looked at, I think, was to do with brain size.
Yeah.
Like not like in volume, but in terms of like density or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the first one was, I think, in like they measured long-term health benefits, so good senility, something like that.
This was so cognitive processes, memory, attention, and what they called cognitive flexibility.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic result was they said that the distance between the languages and the dialects doesn't seem to make much difference in terms of these net gains, these advantages.
Oh, that's good.
So again, so they're going to. This is a kind of preliminary study, and they're going to do more research in Belgium, which has a lot of these cases.
Right.
I think what they wanted is cases where, in a relatively small area, you have big groups of bidialectals and bilinguals and monolinguals.
Going back to Rob's section, do you not think that what you talked about here in Rob's section shows the development of how people view language these days, rather than trying to distill everything to a basic form? What this shows is that people are a lot. Studies have shown that there's a lot more flexibility these days.
One thing that they wanted to, or that they did highlight in the results, was that maybe it's still actually contrary to a lot of widely held beliefs, especially in places like maybe in America, in terms of Spanish, is that we don't treat multilingual or bidialectal, we don't treat that as a problem. We actually look at it as an advantage.
Right. Yeah. I think that those people they're kind of focusing on different areas, right?
I know. Yeah. I mean, as a general kind of
a general view of language.
Language.
But I mean, even like what was the name of the guy, Joseph Wright, that you talked about with the dialect dictionary. I mean, people were aware and working on this stuff at the same time.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's true. Yeah. Do you think there's any with our news, we sometimes try to make a connection to actual language teaching. Do you think there is any here?
Don't bother, just learn a new dialect.
Right.
That's what I say.
If you want to make your brain better.
If you go back to our point about being teachers, and you said we have a teacher dialect, then do you think it's our job as teachers to show that, okay, this is how I'm speaking to you as a teacher, but this is what I sound like with my parents or my friends at home? Do you think that we should make that more of a theme of the class, or more of a...
I do that sometimes, but I don't know how useful it is, because I think most students know that you're not speaking as you would naturally speak.
Do you think they do?
I think so. I think I think most students get that. But I mean, I think most students get it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, I think it's obvious if somebody's not speaking the way they normally would. But maybe on a similar topic, do you think that your teaching persona, including the way you speak as a teacher, is slowly kind of getting closer to your persona outside of the classroom?
Or is your persona outside the classroom changing?
Well, yeah, I mean, or the two merging, basically.
Right. I think it depends how drunk I am, to be honest.
In the classroom.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, my wife told me that when I drink, I more of my original voice comes back, in a sense, because she met me when I was a university student. And so now my voice has become more mannered. I've been living abroad for a long time, but yeah, she said that the more that I drink, the more my original accent comes back.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still very much think that teaching is as an act that I put on when I go into the classroom. You're acting, and I think maybe that's the same. That feeds into the dialect that I talk in the class as well. Maybe,
as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, including a classroom.
Right, but that's a stage within a stage. Right. So I mean, the main takeaway from this is this idea of, I think it's being able to systematically switch between forms of language gives the brain the kind of stimulation which can push you to higher cognitive performance. So maybe it is a good thing to keep your teacher voice separate, possibly. Okay, but maybe we'll wrap things up there then. In that case, that was this week's part 3 of our series into
try news.
Okay, thank you.
Get rid of that bit.
So thank you for listening to today's episode.
As always, what we say at the end of every episode, if you'd like to get in contact with us, please send an email at TEFLology@gmail.com. Most of you already do follow us on Twitter, but if you don't, you can find us on Twitter at TEFLology. We also have a website that we're still working on. I think it's getting there. TEFLology-podcast.com. And that's like the home of all of our podcasts.
All our content.
All of our content, yeah. Okay, so it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye. Hi, Matthew.
I'm Rob.
Do that again.
Let's keep going.
That's what happens every time.
Okay, sorry, go on.